So today we are going to be watching The Shining, Stanley Kubrick versus Stephen King, production tales from hell. I've been really enjoying these, and a lot of you guys have been really enjoying me reacting to these. And recently, if you guys have not heard, the hotel or the motel that The Shining was filmed at caught fire. I don't know how it happened. I don't know all the information on it. I just know that it caught fire. And I was like, you know what? Let's go back to The Shining a little bit. The Shining is an absolute beast of a movie. It's a classic. And we're talking about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, not Stephen King's The Shining, but Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And the reason why I call it Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is because Stephen King literally just does not like The Shining at all. He does not like the movie that Stanley Kubrick directed. And for really just creative differences, the way that he directed it was certainly not the way that Stephen King intended it, and Stephen King has been very vocal about that. And there are certainly things that happen within the filming of this production that I'm not going to stand by. I already know, and I'm very much well aware, like a lot of people here, that Stanley Kubrick was very much aggressive and kind of a dick to a certain actress in the movie, Shelley Duvall. We are all aware of this, and there are actually glimpses and scenes of this kind of abuse on set, and whether people want to acknowledge it as abuse or not is completely up to you, but in my opinion, yes. He was getting pissed off at Shelley because he wasn't getting the performance he really wanted, and if anybody knows Stanley Kubrick, he is a visionary, masterful director. Everything has to fit his standards. Everything has to be what he envisions, and if it's not, he's going to make you reshoot it 1,000 times before it is. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and dive into this, guys. If you want to see more content like this and want me to do another Production Tales from Hell, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, go support the original video by going down to the description below and clicking that link and going over there and giving it a big old thumbs up and a view. Guys, now of course we'll pause it when I want to give you my personal thoughts and opinions during and of course after the video.
Hello, Danny.
Hello, Danny.
Come and play with us.
Come and play with us, Danny.
Come and play with us, Danny.
Say what you will about Stephen King, man. The guy has made some of the most iconic scenes and iconic scenarios in horror history. The Shining twins, it with the sewer. I mean, it's so many iconic moments. It's Carrie with the prom scene. I mean, when we talk about some of the most iconic moments in film history, Stephen King has, like, so many of them, even not all horror, like the Green Mile when he brings back the mouse, or freaking the Shawshank Redemption when Andy escapes prison. I mean, such amazing artistic style and directing and just writing. Beautiful, beautiful.
Some call it a masterpiece. Others call it a bastardization of a classic novel. It's referenced in countless other movies and TV shows and given many viewers nightmares. Its meaning is often debated and picked apart in film circles, and the context in which it came to be is one rife with controversy. I'm talking about Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's hit novel, The Shining. It's a film that has been a staple in popular culture since it came out in 1980. Yet, its legacy is not without plenty of scandals. The creation of The Shining is one riddled with chaos, misfortune, conflicting life philosophies, and dueling egos. We're exploring all of that and more in this episode of Production Tales from Hell.
There we go. Yeah, quite the drama on this film set.
Hey everyone, it's your Twisted Woman here, Chauncey K. Robinson, and welcome to Production Tales from Hell, where we dive into all the fire and brimstone it took to make the horror films we know and love, and in some cases, the darkness that followed their release. In this episode, we've got a play date with some hotel-dwelling ghosts, or delusions, depending on who you ask, as we explore the rich and dark history behind The Shining. There are 5 circles of film hell: development, production, post-production, distribution, and perhaps the most dreaded, limbo. The Shining met with the devil many times before it was released. Egos and warring philosophies crashed against one another in development hell, while accidents and perfectionist tendencies created a torturous atmosphere during production. Ultimately, the ramifications of a hellish set and the resultant polarizing film led to a legacy that is still hotly debated in the dark film corners of the internet. The Shining is a 1980 psychological horror film directed by Stanley Kubrick from a screenplay he co-wrote with novelist Diane Johnson. not Stephen King. More on that later. It stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, and Danny Lloyd. The film tells the story of writer and recovering alcoholic Jack Torrance and his small family. Jack accepts a position as an off-season caretaker for the historic and totally haunted Overlook Hotel. He is accompanied by his wife Wendy and their young son Danny. Danny has the gift of the shining, a psychic ability that allows him to see the spirits trapped in the blood-soaked past of the Overlook Hotel. Things get treacherous when a snowstorm sets in, and the hotel influences cause Jack to lose his mind. Danny and his family are in real danger and may not make it through the winter if the Overlook has anything to say about it. The Shining was originally a novel by legendary horror author Stephen King. Nearly 3 decades into his career, famed director Stanley Kubrick chose the book as his next movie's source material. Right away, things started off on a testy note, as Kubrick and King began butting heads when it came to their visions for the film. The demons of dueling egos and conflicting visions have arrived.
Yeah, you got...
After the lackluster response to his 1970...
Okay. Before we really get into this whole debate, I'm going to quickly go ahead and say my personal thoughts. In my personal opinion, it's not like I can't understand where both of them are coming from. Stanley Kubrick likes the property, but he wants to make some changes, right? He wants to do what he wants to do for his own piece, his own movie. And Stephen King, this is a guy who takes huge pride in what he writes, and now some director, a big shot director, is telling him what he is going to change, and the changes are just not up for the writer's taste. And I can understand both sides of it. I mean, personally and honestly, if I were to direct a movie, even if it's based on someone else's source material, I would want to show obviously a lot of respect to that source material, which I still think Stanley Kubrick does. I've never read the book, so you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong on that. Maybe there's just a lot more that was changed about the movie than I'm realizing. I'm sure there is. I have almost no doubt that there is. But going back to this, I feel like he did kind of, show respect to the story. It's just he had his own directorial kind of vision that he wanted to go with. And Stephen King just could not mix it well with what Kubrick brought. Some of the things that I did hear about with the book, about the croquet mallet and stuff like that, was a necessary change. And that's no offense to Stephen King, but it's just silly. It's just 100% silly. I do not buy that everybody is terrified of a man swinging a croquet mallet. I'm not saying you can't kill someone with a croquet mallet, but when you're holding an axe, the swings are going to be more terrifying. Every swing that guy takes, because of his murderous intent, is going to be a lot more intense, because when he swings, he's a croquet mallet. You might get a few bruises, and you might get, depending on where he hits you, you might get a good crack, but it's not like something that's going to kill you right away. With an axe, it's like the first swing could be the last. It's a bit more risky trying to take on that threat with him holding an axe than it would be when he's holding a croquet mallet. If he's holding a croquet mallet, hell, I might even jump on in there and try to knock it out of his hands. But if he has an axe, I might be running the opposite direction. You get what I'm saying?
1975 film, Barry Lyndon, Kubrick looked for another book to adapt to screen. This time, a horror book. Maybe he was regretting how a few years earlier he had turned down the chance to direct The Exorcist. Before Kubrick settled on The Shining, he considered adapting novelist Diane Johnson's book, The Shadow Knows. Johnson would eventually end up being Kubrick's co-writer for The Shining, not Stephen King, even though he originally wrote a screenplay for the film himself. But Kubrick rejected King's script, saying it was too literal of an adaptation. And this wasn't just a case of a director wanting to take a different approach to a book he liked. Neither Kubrick nor Johnson thought The Shining, as a novel, was all that good to begin with. In an interview with Michel Simont, the director had this to say about King's successful book.
Well, the novel is by no means a serious literary work, but the plot is, for the most part, extremely well worked out. And for a film, that is often all that really matters.
Wow.
Johnson would take
So the plot itself is where he was most interested in. The plot. It wasn't everything in between. It wasn't, the things with the dream sequence, which we all know is very popular in The Shining, the hose coming to life and trying to attack. That was something that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining, was apparently he had a dream about a hose trying to kill him in this hotel. The Stanley, I think, is where he was. Yeah, the Stanley. That is the inspiration, and to a lot of people, that's just silly. That's not scary at all. And obviously Stanley Kubrick was probably more of leaning in towards those ideas than trying to single out the plot, because he was interested in the plot, and the plot is extremely good, and the characters were probably very well written. But everything that happened with the scares and in between probably were hit and miss for him. Now, obviously, the room sequence where little Danny goes into the room and there's that woman in there, or the crazy naked lady, that, and the twins, of course, which I'm not sure were in the book or not. You're going to have to let me know if they were in the book. Those things, obviously, that were built on from the paranormal aspects and the psychological aspects, and there's so much there. There's so many layers to this idea that you could really play with. But I'm sure there were certain things that he was just not interested with in the writing, because we all know Stephen King, he really goes into full detail about everything that really isn't too important. I mean, I started reading it at one point, and I was probably like 4 or 5 pages in, and we were still on the fact that we were still going down into the basement with Georgie. I mean, he really does spend a lot of time going into detail about everything the character does and wants to talk about, and it's just not necessary all the time. That's no offense to Stephen King, to each his own, but I can understand where Kubrick might be getting at, and that's no offense again to Stephen King, who I hold in high regards. I mean, I hold him in higher regards to the horror genre than Stanley Kubrick.
Sentiment even further, as she was quoted in the Parisian magazine Positive saying,
"Among us, the Shining novel is not part of great literature. It is scary, it is effective, and it works, without further ado. But it is precisely interesting to see how a very bad book can also be very effective. It's quite pretentious."
Someone sounds a little jealous that the studio decided to not go with her book. I'm just saying. The casting of the film...
it's pretty shitty when you have to sit there and tell people that the book itself is bad. You don't have to straight up say it's a bad book. We just wanted to take the things that we enjoyed about it and make it work. But in all reality, it's just bad. It's just a bad piece of literature. We wouldn't recommend. You see, but go watch our movie.
Only deepened the divide between visions for the project. When it came to the pivotal role of Jack Torrance, Kubrick had Jack Nicholson in mind as his first choice. His secondary picks included Robert De Niro, Robin Williams, and Harrison Ford.
Oh my God, dude. Could you imagine Robin Williams in this performance? That would have been scary, because the guy is so genuinely humble and kind, where Jack Nicholson always has this creepy demeanor about him. Robin Williams would have been so out there, and I can only imagine what those scenes would have been like. Now, obviously, I can't really picture anybody else nailing it like Jack Nicholson did. It's pretty much my favorite Jack Nicholson movie of all time, and so good.
All of them as options, especially Jack Nicholson. King felt Nicholson wasn't right for Jack due to his previous performance in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. King saw Jack Torrance as an ordinary man driven to madness. He thought Nicholson would spoil that journey, since the audience would already see him as crazy and unstable. King's protests were ignored, since Kubrick made sure that he could contractually make any changes he wanted to King's work, and that the actor for the lead role was not negotiable. Yeah, things were not getting off to a harmonious start at all. Having read the novel, Nicholson suggested Jessica Lange for the role of Jack's wife, Wendy. In the book, Wendy is more of an independent character with obvious inner strength, but Kubrick had a different idea for the Wendy he wanted in his adaptation. The director wanted Wendy to be more submissive in her relationship with Jack. He envisioned a Wendy who was emotionally beaten down and constantly in a state of fear, perhaps even a victim of domestic abuse by Jack. This drastic change in characterization would be another point of contention for King. Kubrick cast Shelley Duvall as Wendy, a role that would affect her life for years to come. Aside from casting disputes, there were also creative differences about ghosts and the afterlife, significant parts of the Shining story. One could argue that the Overlook Hotel is haunted, at least in King's adaptation, where it most certainly is. This was another place where King and Kubrick butted heads, as the director leaned more towards the psychological when it came to the story's danger. Years later, King would recall a phone call he had with Kubrick when the director was first working his way through the book. The author recalled Kubrick saying,
"Well, don't you find that all ghost stories are optimistic? Don't you think so? Because it means that the presupposition is that if there are ghosts, there's an afterlife. We don't just die, we go on."
King's reply to the director was,
"Mr. Kubrick, what about hell?"
King noted that after a long pause on the other end of the line, Kubrick replied in a very stiff voice.
Oh, I don't believe in hell.
Sounds like a pretty big conflict of philosophies when dealing with
Yeah.
a story about evil ghosts in a hotel that might
see, I like how Kubrick presented it because it made you think. It could have been all on someone's head, people's heads. I mean, that for sure could happen. Or at least that's where the character of Jack was going. It was all psychological. Like, we didn't know if it was spirits having an influence on him, or was it his own just self-esteem, or his own personality, or his own mental state that was really driving him back to just lose his mind. We just didn't know. And there was small hints that the paranormal could have been involved, which I also like. I like that. I do feel like there was actually a haunting going on in the Overlook Hotel. 100%. I do feel like that the paranormal had an influence on him losing his mind. But I also think that he already had lost his mind. I already think that his mind was already effed up to begin with. And the dark past of the Overlook was feeding on that and making him more psychotic, which I really like. And that's just my own opinion. I could be completely wrong about that, but that's what I thought. And then when, the end of the movie started coming around and Shelley Duvall's character was starting to see all these ghosts and all the spiritual stuff and all these crazy scenes, we already knew at that point that, oh my God, it was really haunted and it was having an effect. It makes you question everything more instead of it just being, cookie cutter, just this is what it is. It's a haunted house. Jack is a normal guy losing his mind. No, we don't know everything. We don't know if he was losing his mind. We don't know if there was an abusive relationship going on. We don't know if... I think Stanley Kubrick really wanted to make people, ask questions instead of just walking out of the movie, just getting another typical haunted house movie. There was more to it. There were layers underneath it, and I think that's why I really appreciate Kubrick's version of the story.
Symbolize hell. Fires, cruelty, and endless takes, oh my. The production of The Shining would prove to be a hellish endeavor for many involved. Many of the sets used in The Shining were constructed at EMI Elstree Studios in England. This was where several other high-profile movies were made, such as Star Wars and Indiana Jones. The Overlook Hotel set included a life-size model of the hotel's exterior, modeled after the real-life Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood in Oregon, which was used for some of the film's establishing shots. Unlike most directors who normally jump around the script while filming in order to save time, Kubrick was intent on filming the entire movie in chronological order. He did this, partly, so he could continue making changes to the script as they filmed. This meant The Shining occupied the studio sound stages for 56 weeks, with all the sets continuously kept lit and ready for filming. Tragedy struck in January 1979 when a fire broke out after filming had stopped for the day. Doug Milsom, the movie's camera assistant, recalled in an interview.
And I'm pretty sure the real hotel just had a fire recently. The one that they used for filming.
That the roof of the studio set was burnt through and that they lost several cameras. Kubrick's widow, Christiane Kubrick, would later state in an interview that the director thought the significant delay due to the fires was, quote, quite fun because he could rethink certain things. Ray Marin, the film's sound editor, recalled that Kubrick's only concern during the fire was making sure nothing happened to the sound that they had recorded. There's actually an infamous picture of Kubrick laughing as he stands around the wreckage left by the fire. Perhaps a little macabre, but the fire did result in at least one funny incident. Actor Norman Gay, who played the ghost with the glass of scotch and an axe gash in his head, had to hide from the paramedics during the fire since they thought his wound was real and wanted to take him to the hospital. As if a raging inferno wasn't enough to deal with on set, the actors also were subjected to emotional turmoil. All of it was in the name of getting the perfect shot, but at what cost? Kubrick was a perfectionist when it came to getting a film take exactly how he wanted, and nowhere was that more evident than in The Shining. Reportedly, Kubrick shot 60 takes of the wordless scene where the movie's true hero, Dick Halloran, sits on a bed watching TV. Dick was played by Scatman Crothers, who was 68 when he shot the film. In a 1980 Fangoria interview, Crothers said that the scene where Jack hits him with an axe took 25 takes, requiring him to fall on the floor 25 times. The film also set a Guinness World Record.
And people might be thinking that's not a big deal, but to a 68-year-old man having to fall on the ground how many times? 25 times? I'm sure he probably went home with several bruises. Damn, that is rough. But hey, The scene at least came out good, didn't it? This was back in the day, so there wasn't a whole lot of stuntmen at that point, to my knowledge. I could be wrong about that. I might be really wrong about that, but more than likely not a lot of stunt people to do these stunts for them, so they just kind of had to work with what they had. And yeah, I can imagine that must not have felt good after a while.
For most retakes for one scene with dialogue. The scene in question involved Crothers and Danny Lloyd, who played Danny Torrance in the film. Their scene discussing the psychic ability of shining took 140
Oh my God.
Coming in at a close second, but still a ridiculous number of retakes, was a scene in which Shelley Duvall had to swing a bat at Jack Nicholson. That scene reportedly took 127 takes. Duvall's time on the set of The Shining is perhaps the most infamous and ghastly. In the on-set documentary,
I like how you said
Making The
ghastly.
Shining, filmed by Kubrick's daughter,
The most infamous and ghastly.
Vivian, viewers are able to witness what Duvall went through while filming. In one behind-the-scenes moment, Duvall mentions she has lost some hair due to the on-set stress. As she mentions her troubles, Kubrick can be heard telling the crew,
I don't sympathize with Shelley.
in another moment, after some miscommunication on set, Kubrick tells Duvall that she is wasting everyone's time.
Shelley, you're just wasting everybody's time.
In an interview with the legendary film critic Roger Ebert, conducted months after the premiere of the film, Duvall opened up about her experience.
During the day, I would have been absolutely miserable. After all that work, the reviews were all about Kubrick, like I wasn't even there.
Later, in the commentary for the making of The Shining,
For what it is, you did a phenomenal job in this film. Shelley, you did phenomenal. I think it is fucked up that he would do that. I do. I understand that, yes, you want to get you want to get the perfect shots, you want to get the perfect scenes, you're a visionary, I get that. It's not like I can't understand, but these are still human beings with feelings, and I do not care where you hold yourself on the pedestal on set. Be a decent human being at the end of the day. I do not stand by this kind of shit. As a matter of fact, if he would have looked at me and said that, I would have looked right back at him and said, oh, whoop-de-fucking-do. Working my ass off here, and you're still getting in my face. Now, obviously, don't sit there and say I don't have respect for Stanley Kubrick. I have huge amounts of respect for Stanley Kubrick. He's one of my all-time favorite directors of all time. And of course, this does not change my perspective of Stanley Kubrick's work. But as a person, does it make me look at him a little bit less? Yeah, a little bit. I won't lie. Because I think that is just unnecessary and BS to pull on somebody. Don't sympathize with Shelley. Why? She's being treated like shit. Nobody would like that. I wouldn't like that. So why can't I sympathize? Mind your own business, actually. That's probably what I would have said to him, and I probably would have got fired. Because I can't stand people like that. I just can't stand. I don't care how old you are. I don't care where you place yourself on the pedestal in life. You're a director. Whoop-de-fucking-do. You don't treat someone like that. That kind of shit would not work in today's society. So any directors who are thinking about, going off on anybody on your set and treating them like shit and influencing other people on set to treat them like shit, yeah, I might want to reconsider that because it probably will be called out. And I think it should be called out because it's BS. I'm sorry, when I saw that, it really got under my skin. I love Stanley Kubrick. I love Shelley Duvall. That was bullshit.
Vivian Kubrick confirmed that her father deliberately bullied Duvall in order to enhance the insecurity and helplessness in her portrayal of Wendy. Stephen King complained about this adaptation of Wendy, calling the film misogynistic and saying that Wendy Torrance is just presented as this sort of screaming dish rag. This stressful time on set for more than a year would haunt the actress's career for years to come. Although The Shining has pretty high marks from modern critics, it wasn't a beloved hit when it first came to theaters. A reviewer in Variety stated that Kubrick has teamed with jumpy Jack Nicholson to destroy all that was so terrifying about Stephen King's bestseller. Gene Siskel called it a crashing disappointment. Perhaps the biggest critic of the film was Stephen King himself. It
Probably,
makes sense
yeah.
for him to be protective of the story, since The Shining is one of King's most personal works, inspired partly by his own struggles with alcoholism. Of Kubrick's film, King is quoted as saying,
Kubrick just couldn't grasp the sheer inhuman evil of the Overlook Hotel. So he looked instead for evil in the characters and made the film into a domestic tragedy with only vaguely supernatural overtones. That was the basic flaw. Because he couldn't believe, he couldn't make the film believable to others.
King would go on to write a TV miniseries of The Shining, directed by Mick Garris and broadcast on ABC in 1997. His screenplay was a much more faithful adaptation of his novel. Kubrick's film would also be nominated for 2 Razzie Awards, Stanley Kubrick for Worst Director and Shelley Duvall for Worst Lead Actress. In early 2022,
That's so sad.
the Razzies would retract Duvall's nomination, citing the abuse she was subjected to during production.
Well, no, I don't even think she was bad. And the directing wasn't bad. So I don't know what they were smoking to think that The Shining was bad. It wasn't bad. In my opinion, it wasn't. Even back then, if I would have seen it, I would have thought it was a scary-ass movie. I'm confused on why people thought it was bad. Shelley Duvall was not a bad actress in it in any sort of means, even if she was great in the movie. Oh, that is sad. That is sad. On top of everything, she felt like nobody liked her performance. Wow. What a...
Oh boy, that was a lot of hell to go through. The question now is, does The Shining come through unscathed despite all that chaos? Get your pitchforks ready, because I'm going to say that it does not. In looking at The Shining from a visual perspective, it is a haunting film with beautifully stylized moments. But Kubrick and Johnson didn't respect the source material to begin with. So a Stephen King story, this is not. And in knowing the unfathomable pressure Duvall was put through, it pretty much taints any joy one can get from her harrowing performance. No amount of artistry justifies a dangerous and cruel work.
No, you're right.
Still, it's hard to dismiss the cultural impact the film has made on cinema today, for better or worse. And will someone please give Shelley Duvall her flowers? Because despite the hate she received, both on set and in public, she is perhaps the most compelling part of this movie. She went to film hell and back, and survived. The road to this movie hell was paved with high stress and probably took over 200 takes to get there.
Make
I'm
no
Chauncey
mistake.
K. Robinson.
Okay.
And this has been Production Tales from Hell.
Okay. Let me go ahead and say what I think really quick. Because I don't want people to think that I'm sitting here defending Stanley Kubrick for what he did. I truly am not. This did feel like, more of a video trying to give credit where credit was due. And I respect the hell out of that to Shelley Duvall, because she does deserve a lot of the credit that Stanley Kubrick and Jack Nicholson both got. She definitely does. I really mean that. And I really am heartbroken that it took Stanley Kubrick to literally mentally abuse this woman for what he was saying, get this performance out there, which was completely unnecessary. In my personal opinion, I do not think Stanley Kubrick needed to drop that low. I really don't. That does not take anything away from his, in my personal opinion, very phenomenal directing with the movie. Directing of the people involved, I don't think so. But directing of the movie, yeah, he did a phenomenal job. Jack Nicholson did a phenomenal job. Shelley Duvall did a phenomenal job. And she does not deserve to have that credit taken away. She was just as responsible for the success of today for The Shining as the other rest of the cast and crew. 100%. And it is sad that she did not get the amount of love that the other people got for this film. In my opinion, that is shameful and shit, in my personal opinion. And I actually have heard that Shelley Duvall is getting somewhat back into acting, which that's awesome. And I hope it really works out for her. I really do. I really do. I wish her nothing but the best. And I still don't stand by what he did. I think it's disgusting, and I think it's heartbreaking, and it's horrible to pull on somebody, another human being. It's just, no. It's not right. It's just not right. But I do stand by The Shining being phenomenal. And I will always stand by The Shining being a phenomenal film. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know your own personal opinions down below. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, go support the original video, and I'll certainly see you guys in the next one. Do take care.
Throwing down, coming after me if you can't stay.